Well, so
this is an interview done in 1994 with Zerka
1994.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
with Zerka Moreno. It's the second interview we did with her. We did another one in 1983. Holwell International Center for Psychodrama was started in 1974 in Devon with myself and my husband Ken Sprague. It became an international training center for sociodrama and psychodrama.
But do you remember when was it? Where was the interview done? How
yes,
was
the interview
Zerka?
done was upstairs in my consulting room, which we called the Lark Room. Merlin Pizzoli, the Lark at Heaven's Door. He named the room. We were uninterrupted there. We had students from many countries, 12 countries, something like that, in those days that she came. And she came about 20 years every year to Holwell.
Look, from time to time, what I'm going to do is like this. I'm going to be out of the picture because there is no someone else taking care of the picture, and I will try to get you closer.
Yes, okay.
Okay? So let me, otherwise it will be absolutely boring, these two people seated all the time with the same angle. Well, of course, it's not a Hollywood production, but it's not because it's a small production that we will do the same thing again. Okay, now the idea is for us to take the interview and offer the opportunity for people who didn't have the time or access to the written part to sort of rehearse and do the...
They can hear it on tape.
Yes, so they can hear on tape. They can see also. So, what about you being Zerka?
Okay.
And I will be Marcia. Is it okay with you?
Fine.
Am I presentable
Perfect.
as a Marcia?
Yes, you are. Am I presentable as a Zerka?
Yeah, let's see. So, Zerka Moreno. We are very pleased to have you back at Holwell. The last formal video interview we did was back in 1983. Of course, we can sometimes change a little bit the title, the text. So many things have changed in these 11 years.
They certainly have, and I'm glad to be back.
Really? How would you describe Zerka Moreno's philosophy? A very serious question.
Well, he wanted to improve life itself. His idea was not simply to treat mental patients or to treat emotional disturbances. He wanted to improve life itself, to create a revolution, a social revolution in which people would live more harmoniously together through studying their relationships and working on them together. So, to think of psychodrama only as a clinical approach, magical as though it can be at times, is not really the aim he had. He wanted to create a sociometric revolution, and he wanted to improve on Marx, in fact.
On Marx? Why did he want to improve on Marx?
Well, he said there were things about Marxism that did not deal with the emotional reality, underlying the social and economic reality, and that religion hadn't worked, and science hadn't worked. Maybe a combination of the two would. In fact, as you know, when we do psychodrama, we come very close to religious experience. There is something very loving about a method which brings one's fellows being closer together. I've had a young girl say to me, I'm supposed to feel this way in church, but I don't. After psychodrama, I love my fellow men so much better. This is me, Marcia, saying on Zerka's discussion. I remember we had a patient come from the hospital to Holwell, and she said, in the hospital I feel something is wrong, but when I come here, I feel something is right. So that's the same kind of healthiness.
So
Back
this
to
is Marcia. Now we have two Marcias here.
Yes, we do. For that moment, we do.
Okay, now back to
Zerka. If one really plans the combination of the two, where the sociometric approach, the measurement of human relations is adequate or insufficient.
It's adequate or inadequate?
Well, one brings together these things in the psychodrama. You bring psychodrama in. So if the measure of human relations is inadequate or insufficient, then you bring in the psychodrama. Moreno never believed that psychodrama was the beginning and the end all of solving the problems of humanity. So what was his philosophy? He wanted to be a healer of mankind, and that was his goal in life.
So, do you think he wanted to create other healers of mankind?
Absolutely. He knew he couldn't do it by himself. In fact, he defined group psychotherapy as one person, the therapeutic agent of the other, one group, the therapeutic agent of the other. He said before he died, if God comes back, God will come back as a group. That the healing group will expand into other groups was really his model. He was inspired, you know, by the great religions of the world and the whole idea that prophets don't sit and wait for the people to come to them. They go out into the world and contact the people where they are and where they live and where they suffer.
Well, Zerka, tell me about Moreno and Martin Buber.
Well, they were contemporaries. Buber was influenced by Moreno. Moreno wrote all his German books anonymously, but under a general editorial title. He started that in 1914. It was called Invitation to an Encounter in English. He wanted to create encounters between human beings, not as a finished or final product, just as a book in which an author does not meet face to face with his readers unless the readers come to dialogue with another. The book was only a stepping stone for the meeting itself. Between 1918 and 1920, Moreno edited a German literary magazine called Der New Diamond, the New Demon. He respected Socrates, who had spoken of the demon or inner voice. One of the contributors to that magazine was Martin Buber, a theologian. At that time, Buber wrote Hasidic stories. He was not yet writing Ich und du, I and thou. That appeared later. I believe that was 1924 or 25. There was a letter between Moreno and Buber remembered being in touch with Moreno. He was then living in Jerusalem. Buber came from a more Orthodox Jewish background than Moreno, and he was closer to a classical model in relationship to God. Moreno was influenced by others, Jesus, Buddha, Socrates, and these were the figures that inspired him.
Well, now me as Sergio, just a small comment on that. When you say as Zerka that Moreno wrote all his German books anonymously, let us...
Some were not.
Yeah, the first ones, precisely the Einladung zu einer Begegnung, published by him in 1914, and then the following year, the other one, the second volume, I would say, of the Einladung zu einer Begegnung, were not anonymous. They were signed J. Levy, right? And the second point is that when it said that the Ich and Du Buber appeared later, it was actually 1 year before what Zerka said. It was in 1923. But now I'm back to Marcia. As Marcia. Moreno introduced the idea of the Godhead in his work. What did he mean? by the Godhead.
He looked at the beginning of the one God and the enormous contributions made by the Hebrews, who eliminated the many gods and worshipped just one. There had been prior to that only one other instance among the Egyptians, when the sun god was worshipped by a fairly brief period. Everywhere else there were numerous gods. But maybe this one god was not such a great contribution after all. Maybe it would have been better if the Greeks had prevailed, who knows. But in fact, the Jews are the people of the book, the Bible. They proclaimed, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." That was a God of great power and wisdom, distant and remote. The Orthodox Jews are not allowed to speak or write out his name. Moreno identified the Hebrew God as the He God. He thought that the Jews, being like children, believed that the world had been created in the past somewhere, long before they came, just as when you enter into your family. When you are born, you enter into an unknown world. They saw the world established by a God long before they were born. That God created the world and then stopped creating. But Moreno said, actually, the universe is also God, are constantly being transformed, still into development. And then he saw the Christian revolution as a way to bring God closer to the human being, embodied as a human being. People could relate to that God experience on a more intimate level. It was a God of closeness and love. That God he called Thou God. However, he observed was the great idea of the God of love has been betrayed so many times and in so many different ways by people that we need a new manifestation of God, one that fits our image of the world better. He pointed to a Godhead that is not outside of us but inside of us, the Godhead within, and he called that manifestation of God the I God. With that inspiration he declared, "I am God." That has been profoundly misunderstood. He heard voices, and these voices conveyed these truths to him, not in the sense of a mental patient, but as a seer. He declared, among other statements, "I am the father of my father," and that was interpreted as megalomania. He was not talking about one individual I, but as a collective I. Everyone carries this God within. Everyone is part of God. All of us together make God. We are co-creators of the universe and responsible for the welfare of every other being in it. But God needs us as much as we need God to help create the universe, which is always becoming. And God is always in becoming, as long as we are there to carry the God within us, within ourselves.
I remember when I was in training, I was very excited once because doctor said I was a genius. And I ran back to the house and Elaine Goldman was there, and I said, "Elaine, doctor called me a genius." And she said, "He called me a genius an hour before." And somebody else was at the table and said, "And he told me I was a genius yesterday." And maybe that is part of his idea of the Godhead, that everybody has a genius inside of them, and that all he has to do is affirm it for them, and they will help bring it out themselves.
That is a very good point. I think one of the great gifts he had was in touching other human beings, especially people younger than he was. He was able to see them not as they were now, but as they could become, their potential. And he gently led you to that potential and would be able to tell each individual, "You're a genius." He never said that to me directly, but I heard him say it to somebody else who said to him once, "That is a very interesting young lady," as I was leaving the room, and he said, "Oh, she's a genius in her own right." So he really had that sense that the genius is also within and just has to be recognized and affirmed.
But he said it to another person.
Well, I think, yes, he often did, another person. In that case, perhaps our relationship was so close, one doesn't often say to one's nearest and dearest the things you need to say.
Exactly, yes. Did he tell Jonathan that he had genius potential? How did he encourage his own son in that way?
I don't know. I'll have to ask Jonathan if he ever told him that directly. But the wonderful thing about JL was that when Jonathan confronted him or asked a question, his first answer was always, "Yes, Jonathan, yes. That's very interesting." And then he would elucidate. He might say, "Let's look at this. On the other hand," and so he gave him a lot of affirmation. However, when he graduated from college, he was unable to come to the graduation because he was already quite old then. He was 82, and he arranged a birthday dinner with Jonathan, myself, and he at a local restaurant with a cake, complete with a sparkler, you know, a Roman candle on it, and Jonathan was very touched. When I tucked Jael into bed that night, and he looked at me and took my hand and said, "You need not worry about Jonathan. He is very gifted and very talented." So I am sure he saw this human being who was just beginning to come forth at age 21 and would blossom into some very worthwhile human being.
So, his yes was affirming the question. He was not answering it. He was affirming the fact that Jonathan has asked a question and the answer was almost a detail, which in a way would create somebody who had confidence in their question-making ability.
Right, right. Philosophers ask significant questions. My son took his degree in philosophy.
Interesting point. And Jonathan is now in the field of medical ethics, asking questions, sometimes quite brave questions. Do you think that Moreno's philosophy relates to the world as we know now? We know it in what way?
Well, in all fairness, at one point, about 4 years before he died, he was somewhat disillusioned in his ability to reach the larger world. He really had hoped to create a sociometric revolution, a revolution in human relations. However, when death was approaching, he became more realistic. I sat by his bedside crying, trying not to cry because he was telling me that he was satisfied with what he had achieved. I think it has Moreno's philosophy, I think the answer is yes, it has all sorts of possibilities. I think it has not begun to be really minted yet. His legacy, and people don't appreciate sufficiently the tremendous flexibility of this approach in many different fields. He was years ahead, maybe a century ahead of his time. And some people are just beginning to catch up with him in psychodrama. They haven't begun yet to catch up in sociometry. They appreciate sociometry, but somehow the interest went down. Perhaps technology began to interfere with the man-to-man relationship that he was so careful to indicate and to specialize in and to foster. But the more we advance technologically, the more we need it. We are becoming more and more isolated. We isolate ourselves with machines and we contact each other through machinery. What has happened to the face-to-face encounter? On the other hand, it may take away the minimum encounter of the people right around them.
By the way, Mary Northway and Helen Jennings were the ones who, in the early years, supported by Moreno, took up his ideas on sociometry, 2 women. And it was men who took up his ideas of group psychotherapy and who began to take his ideas of group psychotherapy and to began to take his ideas of psychodrama. I wonder if perhaps that has some bearing on the fact that psychodrama went forward more than sociometry did.
Sociometry among the sociologists was very well accepted. And if you look at the table of contents of different journals, the largest number of people who really contributed were actually men. The only significant females were Joan Criswell, Mary Northway, Helen Jennings. There weren't that many females.
No.
Thinking in those terms, it may lead us into the wrong track. I don't believe that's quite correct.
Right. But it's interesting that you, as a woman, are carrying on his work all over, are carrying on his work all over the world.
Yes.
Would you ever, in a million years, have thought that you would be doing this at 77 years old?
Never. I often thought, looking back, my life is a fairy tale. I came to Beacon looking for a new life for my sister who was psychotic, and what I found was a new life for me. That was a profound lesson for me. And the lesson for me was that in this lifetime, whatever else you do, don't search for yourself. Look to help other people, and then you will find what you need. Very profound lesson.
Maya Angelou has a wonderful line, a poem. She says, "They came in a nightmare and hoped for a dream." It's lovely. I mean, in a way...
But it's exactly what happened in my life.
Yes, yes.
It was a nightmare, a horrendous one. I was terrified that my sister would not come through it again. This was her second psychotic attack in a few years.
And Moreno used to say that the best things happen by accident. Your liaison with him became the important one, even though you had come to him to care for your sister.
Yes, right. You know that Father Divine, a black prophet, not very well known in this country, said things don't just happen, they happen just. That's quite an idea. As we age and hopefully mature, we need to start looking at our lives, and we have that sense of completion of our lives. If we have lived it fairly well, we say, yes, that's just the way it should have been. That's what I feel about my life. Yes, I could have dreamed it, but it's just the right way. I mean, it's like a beautiful dream.
But there aren't many people who accept their lives like that. I remember giving birth, and the big question was it a boy or was it a girl? And when the baby came out, it was just what we wanted. And then, I'm not being a very good Marcia, but I will promise I will improve. Up to the end, I will be an excellent Marcia. And when the baby came out of it,
It was just...
It's because it's written if. When the baby came out of it, was just what we wanted. I think many people are so very disappointed at their own life to which they give birth. I would guess that's why so many people in middle age and those who become older get so disillusioned and angry and bitter.
And resentful.
Yes, but you don't feel like that to me at all.
It's marvelous. It's been so rich.
Yes, I've given that a lot of thought. Obviously, I cannot do it by myself. That's why I am so glad there are good helpers like you. Let's talk about needs, because the world is so full of desperate needs. I think we need a psychodrama emergency center in every city. At least one or more, where people can come before they commit the murders, the rapes, the burglaries, the killings, the violence, the child abuse, where they can come and work out their problems 24 hours a day, where they can say, no, I don't need to do this, let's go work it out. I think that it's absolutely essential. We do not have enough hospital emergency rooms yet. We need psychodramatic emergency rooms. I want to see psychodrama emergency centers everywhere, in every school, in every hospital, in every administrative center, in the government, everywhere, where we can really alleviate some of the concerns that we are struggling with in our world. On the political level, you know, Moreno wanted Khrushchev to meet Eisenhower in role reversal, in life. He would have gone himself to wherever that could come to direct it.
And Mao and LBJ.
Yes, all that.
I remember one night being in the
now we are reversing roles again.
Oh yes, okay. Yes,
so let's come
that.
back. So, please, Zerka, are you going to say yes or not?
Yes, all that.
I remember one night, being in the living room, when he telephoned Mao Zedong in China, he phoned him up and Mao's secretary said he was asleep. Moreno wanted to invite him to an encounter with LBJ. Do you remember that?
Yes, and he also phoned LBJ, but he couldn't get through. And so on that level, I would like to see psychodramatic schools for young people before they become engaged to get married or live together to test out their roles. Not immediate roles, their potential roles, their dreams for their lives. What is it they're looking for to find out? Is this a suitable mate before they become parents? When they are parents, why do they need centers like that where people can learn to live life more fully, more fruitfully, more completely, more satisfactorily? Why not? You know the statement that I told you, life is a test. It's only a test. If this were your actual life, you would have been given better instructions. My word, we need those better instructions.
I always think about babies, that they never come out with a book of instructions, and very few of us know what to do right from the beginning. How did you know how to parent? What were your guidelines for parenting? One thing I noticed, to move to a different subject, by the way, I noticed at the conference in Oxford that really Moreno has established an international language and in some aspects an international behavior. That is to say, we all know what doubling is, what auxiliary ego is, and here a person from Japan can talk to a person in Mexico and they still know what each other is talking about. Do you suppose that this international language and behavior amongst people who work in groups all over the world, do you think that the language has influenced just people who work in groups? Or do you think that that international language and behavior spill over to ordinary, non-professional people?
I think it spilled over. It is more concrete and specific, but it spills over. The sociologist told Moreno, you have been absorbed by the culture. Now, if you pick up a New York newspaper, for instance, they use the word psychodrama. Hit and miss all the time. They do not know what they are talking about. It has become a kitchen term.
And it's in the Webster's dictionary.
Yes, I remember when I bought the Random House Dictionary back in the 50s, it had psychodrama in it, and it had sociometry in it, it had sociodrama in it. The Petit Larousse in the 50s had Moreno in it.
Well, Moreno died in 1974, and here we are in 1994. How does your relationships with JL affect your work 20 years later, Zerka?
As I get older, I think I approximate the essence of this man more and more. I get closer to what he really meant and to what he meant to convey to people. Sometimes people talk about my simplicity. I think it's a sort of purification process that one goes through in this work. I really think I am a more refined director than he was. And people tell me so. Those who saw him work, except how he was with the psychotic patient. Then he was absolutely touching, wonderful, inspired, and inspiring. He loved them and was challenged by them. He was not so interested in the neurotic or normal process. The crazier, the better.
Why do you think it took you 20 years to refine the essence of this man?
Well, if you are living partly in the shadow of such a powerful person, simply establishing your own identity is a task. It takes time. I remember him saying to me, we are so identified at the beginning of our relationship. I replied, yes, but we are not identical. However, in this world where men don't predominate anyway, he was very generous. He was a lot more generous than many geniuses who are dealing with women. He would make space for me and encourage me and let me know you can do this. In that sense, he was extremely generous. On the other hand, I became his helpmate when he could not function anymore. I took over and gave him a great sense of security.
He always asked the other, now, what do you think about that? I remember he's being very impressed with that. Age 23, he would ask me, well, now, what do you think, Marcia? I would think, why does this man want to ask me?
Or perhaps he knew you had wisdom in you.
Well, or that he really liked to hear his idea debated, discussed. He liked a sounding board, I think, and so on. But you began really as an auxiliary ego, I mean. Here was a man you fell in love with. You probably spent Saturday nights doing psychodrama or whatever. Working. So, what was like to be in love with a man who was directing a group session, and once in a while you would play a mother, or you would play a sister, or you would play a double? You were quite dependent on his direction for many years, really?
No, I think he called upon my auxiliary work because he knew he did not have to direct me very much. He very rarely directed me, in fact. He gave me a lot of leeway. He grasped my ability to take care of this and to go along with him. We were a team, so he began to depend on me, as well as I depended on him for his wisdom and his knowledge. He depended on me for my skills.